This video is about turning the piece of steel missing from here into this two-way ratchet pawl, operating on the ratchet wheel that I made in the previous video. There's drilling, sawing, plenty of filing, some work on the shaper over there. There's some work on one of my small milling machines, a bit of turning work on my Schaublin lathe, and some bench work. All in all, a fair bit. So it may end up split into two videos to make it more watchable. I hope you do enjoy watching it. Either way, let me know in the comments. It would be good to hear what people think. So on with the video. Well, in order to end up with a piece of metal which is roughly the sort of shape described here, I've been drilling lots and lots of holes in my piece of 10mm steel plate in order to try and release the shape from it. If it was very thin metal, I'll be honest, I'd be using a jeweler's piercing saw. But 10mm thick, it's been onto the drill press, describe a reasonable pattern where I know that I want to make my life easy. Also drilled in four feature holes, one reamed, 3 tapped, just because it's easier to do those while it's one complete lump of metal. Some largish diameter holes where I've got radii or just want to make my life easier on the corners. And round here, it's just going to be a mixture of hacksaw work, and I am going to try the piercing saw because, you know, I know they're dinky little things and the blades are very fragile, but I quite like using them. And if I can manage on this, then it's going to be easier in some places than the hacksaw. So I'll have a bit of an experiment and start releasing this lot. Well, unsurprisingly, a quick test showed that the hacksaw was pretty good on the straight lines and pretty quick, and useless on the curved bits, as you can see there. And actually, little piercing saw is not too bad, even in this 10mm metal, just for breaking through the little bits between these holes. So that's the way I'm going. I'm going to try and release this little ratchet in waiting from its larger lump of parent material. So probably not the most exciting thing to do or to watch, but it's got to be done. So as I now have two separate pieces of metal after a little bit of piercing saw work, time to pierce into this and round here to remove that. I might do that with a hacksaw, in fact. And after that's done, I can get rid of the piercing saw support, which I used to hold the work, and put this in the bench vise and do a little bit of fairly straightforward hacksaw work onto these lines here. So on with that. Well, there's now quite a lot of rough filing to be done to get rid of all these lumpy bits that I don't want there anymore. Quite a coarse file to start with, and it's just a fairly sort of slow and steady business of getting rid of all those bits. And vaguely eyeing up to my marks. you get the general picture. I'm just going to carry on with this. Obviously, a fair bit more to do there and all the way around, frankly. So rather than bore you to tears with that, you're just going to have to take it on trust that that's what I'm going to be doing for quite some while to come. So as initially enjoyable as it was filing this out, it quickly wore a bit thin because it's quite thick material for me. So I decided to use the shaper. Had a little bit of a go already. Simple methodology. Set the cutter height to this little setting block. Put a packing piece in the jaws to stabilise them and tape it in place so I don't have to keep putting it back. And basically I just set the job up in there with my setting piece. As long as I can see a little whisper of my line, then I'm in about the right place. And then just lock that off. Tighten the jaws up. Fire up the shaper after I've traversed it. Looks like I set the job a little bit low. Just bring it up a bit. So the next stage of this job is that I want to counterbore it on its pivot point, just to recess that a bit, to give me a bit more clearance for the springing, which will come later. So that's the job. I'll just bring it in a little bit and see it's clamped down. There's the job itself, clamped down 3 parallels and the counterbore waiting to go. So I'll bring it in a bit closer again and start some counterboring. Just bring in the fine feed. As you can see, at times that looked like it was making really heavy weather of it. The reality is I run the belt really loose on this machine to just keep everything nice and safe and easy for the machine itself. So the motor wasn't really fluctuating in speed very much, just the spindle speed was dropping because of the loose belt tension. You probably saw I tightened it up a bit part way through, but it's just my policy because these sort of jobs are fairly far towards the limit of this machine's abilities. I just like to keep this machine sort of protected by running it with a fairly loose belt. Another view of the part finished Ratchet Pawl. And see, I've counterbored that now to a reasonable, well, it's to a 5mm depth because I set a depth stop on the machine. And I've just very lightly broken the edges of that using a countersink. My way of doing that is just to pop the countersink in there loosely by hand and then actually just rotate the job because it gives you a lot more control over it. And it cuts down the chance of getting any form of chatter. So been quite a lot of hand filing of this. That's basically the finish as per hand file, except for that little bit there where I just took a burnisher over it just to see what it looked like. You can see it still looks fairly scratchy, so I may not go to that level of finish. Just off the file at the moment, and in a short while I'm just going to trial that on the ratchet wheel itself. I've adjusted the jaws of the ratchet several times just to get a nicer action. So I'll come back in a moment when I've got that ready to set up. I said I'd come back to this when I was ready to fit the pawl to the ratchet. First of all though, I'm actually going to show the headstock layout for this spring winder just so there's a little bit more idea of what's going on really. That's the ratchet wheel I made. I put a little set screw in there and that engages on the flat that I did on the shaper onto this hardened spindle, and at the same time I put a pair of notches into the rear of the spindle. That'll help me secure the handle in a way that it doesn't come undone in use. I've managed to align that flat behind that set screw with the flat there, and perpendicular, well, and in line with these two notches, so that I've got an idea where it is when I'm assembling it. So that gives an idea of the general disposition of things. But in order to fit the pawl, I've got to take it apart because there's not much room in there. So I just thought I'd show how that's going to be. So this is the area for the ratchet pawl to go into. That's my freshly filed up ratchet pawl. Those screws are just, well, they were part of setting it up on the shaper. They'll hold little handles for switching the ratchet, and that'll be replaced by a proper little retainer for a spring, the reason for which will become clear. So in the meantime, I've made up a quick little top hat spacer and pivot and a spacer to go behind. That spacer mimics the amount of brass bush that's protruding through the aluminium and holding the ratchet wheel away. So this is all a bit temporary because what I didn't want to do was make this just the right amount for free play and then do the finishing work on this and reduce its thickness and everything comes all sloppy. So that's why it's like that. So that engages in there. That spacer goes behind. Do that up. So what I've aimed for is a switchable two-way ratchet, and that will allow, when it's sprung, that will allow movement in that direction. But if the ratchet wheel is trying to come back, the force is going along there, so it cannot push the pawl out the way. If I want to switch it over, that now works in the opposite rotation. And again, trying to come back against the pawl, it just locks off. There's two reasons for having these great long handles. One is so that from the outside of the spring winder, I can reach to switch it, but I only want to be able to switch it from the outside, as it were, when it's in that lower position. I didn't want it to protrude so much that I could catch it when it's in that upper position. So once that's engaged, it's out of harm's way, as it were, and you just have to use a little handle to push it down. The second reason is that although this will be sprung, the weight of this is at a further out from there when it's here, so it naturally engages itself, and conversely, when it's the other way, naturally engages. So there will be light springing, but it's all trying to make it as safe as it can possibly be, because these larger clock springs do have quite a lot of power in them. And the reason I'm making this is that in recent times I've actually been caught by springs a couple of times, which in 20-25 years never happened before, but it's happened a couple of times in the last few months. So excuse me, I don't want any repeat of that. So that gives an indication of how the ratchet's going to work. I aimed for it to bridge, I think it's 5 teeth, and luckily it does that. Unlike some of the commercial ones, you haven't got to move the ratchet somewhere around before it engages when you switch it over. I've never particularly liked having to fiddle about trying to get it to engage. So hopefully this will be a bit smoother than some of the commercial ones at least. For the springing, I could just make these rather longer and have a coil spring pulling between those 2 points, because that snaps the pawl into place. But I don't really want these hanging out too far. So what I'm going to do is keep them as short as I possibly can, beef that lower mount up a bit, and I'll have a sort of serpentine shaped spring that is in effect a flattened coil spring. So I'll probably show that when I've made it. I said I wanted a little serpentine spring to attach to the ratchet pawl mechanism. That's one made out of what turns out to be extremely poor quality piano wire or music wire. Just hasn't got any real spring to it at all. So tried another piece, that wasn't a lot better, and I'm now on my third piece, and I've taken what will probably prove to be a vain attempt to produce a little jig, hopefully to save me some time and effort. We'll see how that pans out. So first off, I need to form an eye on the end, like a bit like that, to locate it. And it's just using round pliers. As you can see, that's a reasonable amount of effort to bend it. I hope you can see anyway. So I formed an eye, and that idea is that that will locate on there, and then I'll perform a series of, bend it the right way, perform a series of bends to produce what hopefully will be roughly like that, but maybe neater. We'll see. This of course gives me the benefit of some leverage, which is quite welcome because this is reasonably strong wire, thankfully. It will all spring back, so you've got to give yourself a bit of allowance for that. well, it looks a little bit like what I was aiming for. There's obviously going to be quite a lot of tweaking, so I won't bore you with that, but you get the general idea. That's hopefully going to be stretched to fit that and will provide enough spring. It did turn into quite a long video, so I have split it into two. Thank you for watching this far, and look out for the next video.